the entire Trump coalition has always been very unstable. It had a whole bunch of different people in it. It had like populists, nationalists, conservatives, tech bros, libertarians, all just these like it's kind of a random collection of people. Basically, anyone who didn't want like a completely paused society and thought that like crime should be illegal and stuff like that. Um, you had kind of the Trump coalition that came together, and in a lot of cases, it didn't really make a lot of ideological sense. It was more kind of united by the people it was against than by anything it really stood for. Um, there's a lot of overlap between like Elon and the America First crowd, but they aren't the same people. Um, they don't have exactly the same ideology or worldview. So, something that was always going to be a big issue is the whole immigration topic. So, the dog whistle, I don't know if it's a dog whistle, but like the normie mainstream conservative position for the last couple decades has been okay, we don't we're against illegal immigration, but we support legal immigration. So it's like it's okay if we had if we have 20 million illegal immigrants, that's bad. If we had 20 million legal immigrants, that's okay. And some of them will take this to its logical extreme and go, we need unlimited legal immigration, um, but there can be no illegal immigration. And the thing is, it does the same thing ultimately. It causes demographic change, cultural fragmentation, economic issues, all this other stuff. But it was like you could say, well, I'm not racist. I just believe in following the law. Was like the big thing that was always at the core of this. So now Elon is kind of cashing in on that. And Trump said stuff about this in the past about stapling green cards to university diplomas and stuff like this. And Elon and the tech bros and are just saying like, look, Americans are lazy, Americans are stupid, Americans are uneducated. If we want the economy to succeed, what we need to do is just bring in people from the third world. Like we need an unlimited number of people coming in from the third world. Um and that'll somehow that's just necessary. So let's just okay, there's a lot of stuff to unpack here. So firstly, just to talk about this from let's look at this from a liberal perspective. So this whole thing has always been kind of messed up to me. So if the argument is we're going to take the most well-educated people from third world countries, um, take the most educated people from third world countries, the smartest, wealthiest, basically the best human capital from third world countries, and move them to developed countries, isn't that kind of like a fucked up mentality? Because isn't that basically saying that that Ethiopia needs to subsidize the American educational system? So it's like, well, Ethiopians can come in if they're doctors, and like, but the amount of resources Ethiopia has to train doctors is so much less than what America has that basically you're just doing brain drain. You're carrying out this dysgenic policy of just grabbing this is I'm assuming that it works as they say it does, which it doesn't, but assuming that everything goes as planned, for a lot of poor developing countries that don't have a lot of money to invest in social capital, you're just saying we're going to take that money and just fuck them over and they'll never develop. So I know we're not supposed to be altruistic. We're not supposed to think of the third world or anything like that. But at a very basic level, that is the result. Um, so that I think is just something like just from the front to keep in mind is that I think there is something inherently immoral about taking people from countries that can't afford to educate them. Like, it's one thing if you're in France and you're taking people from Germany or something like that, but it's not. It's saying, oh, the Vietnamese government needs to subsidize the Canadian educational system, and that doesn't make any sense. Also, these are the tax-paying people in the population. So you're taking people out of the productive workforce in these countries, and you're shifting the burden to fewer taxpayers. Anyways, but yeah. So that's firstly. That's before we even get into any of the practicalities or side effects of this. I think you can make a case on a very basic level that this whole thing is deeply evil and flawed and screwed up. And it's like an actual form of colonialism. It's like it's actually robbing third world countries um in order to enrich themselves. And it's doing it in a worse way than just taking resources. Because it's taking human capital, it's taking the people who have the high intelligence, who have the skill set, who should be reproducing and emboldening and leading their societies. Anyway, so that's just it out front. So, what is the argument that's being presented here? Basically, from what I can determine, unless we have unlimited third world immigration, something bad will happen. Now, it's not very well explained in any of this stuff what this bad thing is. It takes the form of like the economy won't grow as much if we don't have unlimited third world immigration, or there won't be as much productivity, or companies won't make enough money, or America will lose its dominant position in the world, or I don't know what exactly the thing is um that is going to happen if we don't bring them in is very vaguely referred to. Now, liberals who make the argument say that the pension system entirely depends upon having a positive worker to retiree ratio. And because the previous generation didn't have children in large enough numbers, the only way to do this bring in um, is to bring in people from the third world, and then they can pay the pensions. Now, I guess this kind of logically makes a bit of sense. In practice, that's not how it works, but that is the argument. Now, Elon Musk, I don't think is making that point because he probably doesn't even believe in there being any kind of public pension system. So, if we don't allow unlimited Indian immigration into America, some unspecified bad thing will happen. Like the GDP growth rate won't be high enough, or America won't be innovative enough, or something really bad is going to happen. You just have to do it. So the explanations for why, like the benefits of it, read like a dystopian novel, and that's kind of where I got the title for this. If you start to go through the comment threads, and I didn't really have time to put a bunch of stuff together, but they'll say like, "Oh, well, the Indian immigrants are willing to um blue team." They say that in Canada a lot. Keep in mind, I'm Canadian, so the rhetoric I hear is a bit different than what you people do in the United States. What was I saying again? Yeah, is that Indian immigrants and third world immigrants will be able to um they will tolerate conditions that the native population will not tolerate. Um yeah, it'll tolerate things that the so they'll do things like work 80 hours a week, they'll work like 40 hours unpaid overtime. They will work in horrific living conditions. They working conditions. They'll tolerate extensive abuse from. Let's see here. TK says all GDP enjoyers need to go into the crystal for two. Thank you very much. But they'll eat ramen noodles and I don't know, ramen noodles and like jam or something like that. They'll subsist off of that. They'll live like 20 people to a bachelor apartment, and they'll just or they'll sleep in the streets or they'll sleep at work, and this is what we need. And because the like the native population isn't willing to do this, they deserve to be replaced by the people who are. Now, the question I have to ask is, how is this like a desirable state of affairs? Like, why is it inherently good if somebody works 80 hours a week? Like, I get it's this weird, like, American thing which is similar to the Japanese thing, which is the more hours someone spends at their job, the more productive they are, and the higher the GDP growth rate grows. It doesn't really matter if that you're going to actually like achieve anything. Like, are you doing productive work? Are you developing something? Like, it just if you are physically in the office or physically on call, somehow that automatically produces GDP growth. So that's the argument that I keep seeing, and we get this in Canada too, where it's like, well, we can pay third world immigrants less than the minimum wage. We can make them work like 40 hours of unpaid overtime. We can have like the standard be 80 hours a week. We can have them live in shacks and stuff like that. And because that's a more economically competitive thing to do, if we bring them in, then we can force the indigenous population to do that. And so like the question I have is, why is this desirable? Who really wants to do that? I know there are some American conservatives who like go bootstraps, yada yada. I'm a man, I have to work 80 hours a week, or stuff like that. But it's to me it's irrelevant. The question is what results in the best life for people, and what is the most efficient way to run things. And these are not necessarily like the what Elon is describing. But like so basically the argument, and we see this with a lot of the illegal immigration thing, is we want a slave caste. We want like a slave underclass that we can abuse, that we can mistreat, that we can ignore basic human rights and basic human decency towards. So we're just going to import people to use as our slaves, and that'll regularize it. So then we can institute slavery on the native population. Like, I don't get it. Like, if people are given the choice between like 1% additional GDP growth rate and 20 hours of unpaid overtime, 99% of people are going to pick the less GDP growth rate. Sorry, 1% less GDP growth rate versus working 20 hours of unpaid overtime, or stuff like that. So, but it's just, to me, once again, it's fucked. And I think, let me just look this up. Okay, so because I think this is an important thing for those of you who are Catholic. Um, Sins that cry to heaven for vengeance. So in Catholicism, we have the sins that cry to heaven for vengeance, which are the worst things we can see. So if you go through them, they are, let's see here, willful murder, sodomy, oppression of the poor, and defrauding laborers of their wages. The unjust withholding of fair compensation from workers is a sin that cries to heaven for vengeance. And like the idea that it's cool to not pay people overtime because it shows their commitment or their work ethic, I think that is directly against that. I think that is defrauding workers out of their compensation, especially if labor law requires you to do it. But because they're not citizens, we can get around that somehow. So that's just what I like. I think ultimately, though, you just have to think about what kind of society do you want to live in. Do you want to live in a society where people work a reasonable number of hours a week, where they have time to spend with their families, where they have time for leisure, where they have time to pursue their interests and their hobbies and stuff like that, or everybody is just physically at work 80 hours a week and they have no time for anything else? They just work and sleep, and that is the quality of life that people can expect. And I just don't want to live in that society. I don't get why that's such a weird thing. And we always have this like false dichotomy where they're like, either it's gonna be, I don't know, I'd say Sweden, but Sweden's actually an economically productive country. Either you're gonna be like the late Soviet Union, or you're gonna be Ancapistan. There is nowhere, there's no like mixture, there's no balance, there's no like compromises that can be made. Either nobody works and everybody is on 100% government income, or it's Ancapistan, it's like Cyberpunk 2077, it's like Fallout New Vegas, and corporations own you as their slave. Like, it's like it's just kind of a silly thing to even talk about, like. And this is why, and ironically enough, I kind of identify a bit as a technocrat, because I feel like issues like this are best handled by like professionals, people who actually like study this in depth and can look at it in more of like a systematic or scientific way, rather than just making it ideological. So I feel like with a lot of these things, it's really more about what happens in reality, and stuff like that, rather than whether you ideologically think it's a better thing for people to spend 80 hours a week at work or not. I think you just need to try to find a balance. I don't like, I get that that's a cold take, but it just seems like a pretty sane take, to me at least. So there's also the other aspect of this entire like whole third world thing. And TK, let's see here. Caleb Ryan points it out, and this is something we have in Canada. It also dramatically, it causes massive inflation, because they aren't building houses nearly quick enough to keep up with all these people who are coming in. So in Canada, we basically have a 0% vacancy rate. I've done videos on this past. In the last 10 years, housing prices have gone up. In some places, like 50, 60, 70, 80, 100%. And they're going up like 15 to 20% a year, both in terms of rental prices and in terms of the cost of actually buying something. And like Justin has had to release 40-year mortgages because people can't afford the 35-year ones. So the idea of even owning a house is kind of put out of hand. Let's see here. But yeah, like that's another aspect of it. So the point I'm trying to make is, okay, so the economy grows slightly faster, but as like a side effect of the economy growing slightly faster, your cost of living goes up because you have more people trying to buy food, you have more people using services like medical care, like public transit, like roads, like, all the negatives of sudden population growth, but without any kind of ability to plan for it in the long term, because it's so sudden and because it's so sporadic. And you're importing people who don't understand the norms of the society they're being imported into. So, like, part of the issue that we have in Canada is a lot of the people we import don't understand what living in a high trust society is like. So they will just, if there's anything available that is meant to be used in moderation, but isn't legally restricted, they will abuse it. So this is a big problem in the medical sector, wherein you can basically just, because Canadians have single payer healthcare, you can theoretically just book any number of appointments to get any amount of covered treatment. So my understanding is a lot of immigrants will do that. They'll just use all the resources they possibly can when we're supposed to be somewhat sparing with it. Also, there's a recent thing where all of the food banks and soup kitchens and stuff like that across Canada have been completely cleared out because um, because Indians in particular will just go to the food banks. They'll just say they're poor and they'll just take all the food out of them. So, like in a lot of places, the actual poor homeless people now don't have anything to eat. Um, yeah, they don't have anything to eat because, and there was one case where there was like this Indian who was making like $80,000 a year, and he put like a TikTok video up about how to like get food from food banks, and they just call it like free food or something like that. So, and this is just kind of an ongoing issue, and it's hurt a lot of charities in Canada, and it's caused this massive spike in the amount of aid being requested without it actually needing to be requested. So I don't know if anyone else has really been finding this, but that's kind of also just part of the issue. Um, Also, in a lot of cases, there's just no real. Okay, so let's talk about the people we're actually bringing in. Because the way that Elon and the tech bros, and they do this in Canada too, they make it sound like these people are all geniuses. They're all brilliant. They're programmers, they're engineers, they're physicists, they're the people of the future. And it's like Operation Paperclip, where we're gonna bring over all the the top 0.0001% of German scientists and make them build stuff for us. That's what happens every day with unlimited third world immigration. So like the people we're bringing in are high quality. They're high quality. They're brilliant. All of them have IQs over 140, and stuff like that. And that's kind of what we're supposed to believe. And you might go, well, Argent, Canada's taking 500,000 Indians a year. How is it possible that India has like millions upon millions of people with genius level IQs that were unable to find work in India? This is an interesting question and one that is never answered. So we will get that. If you live in Canada or anywhere that's had a lot of Indian immigration, what the immigrants are generally doing is they will just take over all the service industry jobs, all of the the lower stuff, like stuff at restaurants, food service, hospitality, tech support, customer service, all of that stuff basically just gets taken over by them. Now, some of them do make it up the ladder a bit into like white collar jobs. It should be noted though that the government in a lot of cases pays companies to hire them. Um like they pay companies to hire them, or there's tax breaks, or there's some other incentive, or it's just affirmative action and they need a certain percent of their company to be that way. So, like, even when they get into those positions, there's a lot of stuff that's distorting the market. Um, like, affirmative action distorts the market. Tax benefits do. Other just forms of government policy. So it's not like it's even it's not even like it's a level playing field. Uh, and they're just out competing. So even if we accept the premise that they just work better or whatever, um, part of the reason they're filling like it's because they can be paid less and they get their work subsidized by various government programs. So Caleb Ryan points something out, and this is kind of another issue. So one of the big things that we hear is they're doing the jobs that Americans won't do, or Canadians won't do, or Europeans won't do. Now, I've been wanting to do a video called The Real History of Agriculture in Medieval Europe, where I talk about how white people have never been able to harvest their own crops. And back during medieval Europe, they had to bring in millions of Moroccan migrant workers to pick all the grain for them, to pick all the grain and the grapes and stuff like that, because white people are inherently incapable of picking their own produce. And it just goes like to all of this stuff, and this is the argument, like, well, Canadians and Americans don't want to work at Walmart, they don't want to work at Dairy Queen, they don't want to work at McDonald's, and stuff like that. And once again, like, maybe my experience is wrong and people can challenge me, feel free to challenge me in the chat, but I find, especially lately, teenagers and people who are trying to get some work experience or maybe make some cash to help pay for their education or just have some extra spending money when they're in high school, they just can't get it because they have like some dude from India with a master's degree who's serving popcorn. And how are they supposed to compete with that? Because that they're getting a government subsidy for hiring that person, and they might not have to actually pay them minimum wage. And they can say, I don't know, like, look, we need a master's degree for this popcorn scooping position, and stuff like that. So, like, I just don't think that's the case. And I have friends who haven't been able to get white collar jobs that they're qualified for, or skilled jobs that they're qualified for. And they've tried to go and get lower quality work because they want to like do something, and they can't get jobs at like McDonald's or stacking shelves or any of that stuff. In large part due to the fact that we have all these people from the third world who come here and just take the whole, like, just grab every single position. So I would question, firstly, how many, like, are they actually jobs that people won't do, or is that just a meme and there are people who would do them, it's just we're going to pretend there aren't people who do them. There's also the issue of people will do them, they just want to be fairly compensated. Now, this is a big debate, like, what should the minimum wage be, what is fair compensation, and all of these things are, like, these are interesting questions, and these are things that I think we have to discuss as a society, and that has to be worked out within industries. But but that being said, um sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. um but that being said, what they want to pay them is not like consistent with a first world society or a developed country. It's like you can debate, oh, should they be paid $15 an hour, or $20 an hour, or 18 or something like that. Whereas they're like, no, we want the Mexicans who'll do it for $4 an hour. And it's just a rate so low and so absurd that no one, like, from the country is actually going to be able to compete with that, because they would starve if they were paid that, and they aren't willing to accept the living conditions that would allow them to live on that. Also, just there's all kinds of other financial issues involved with it, but hopefully you get what I the point I'm trying to make is, that it's are the jobs really the jobs that people won't do, or does there have to be some adjustment in the market, um in the market, that like that enables, like, gives a is somehow able to find that equilibrium between how much people require to do something. And yeah, so you get what I mean. Hopefully I'm making sense as I kind of ramble about this. But I just like, so there are some jobs people don't want to do, but traditionally what happened is the pay rate for the jobs people didn't want to do just went up until somebody did them. Like working a cesspit, for instance, in the medieval Europe was a shitty job, literally. It was disgusting. No one wanted to do it, but it paid very well. To my understanding, it paid better than a lot of craft jobs did. And they would always be able to find people to do it because the pay reflected the difficulty of the job. It's basic kind of supply and demand. But I guess what they want to do is just have um, unlimited supply. Their solution to fixing the supply demand thing is unlimited supply. So we have that, but then we also have the whole skilled worker thing. Getting back to the whole like, okay, so let's just put some of this stuff together. So we have the immigrants that are all 140 plus IQ geniuses who, and wait a minute, isn't this kind of okay, so, sorry, my brain's trying to follow this. So what we need is we need to bring in 140 IQ geniuses to do the jobs that Americans won't do, like harvest vegetables. So we need 140 IQ people with doctorates from India to harvest vegetables. Is that what the narrative is? Because that kind of feels like what that narrative is, but it's kind of all over the place. So then we get into like skilled things. So it's like, well, we don't have enough engineers, we don't have enough scientists, we don't have enough chemists, we don't have enough of any of these things. We don't have enough programmers. We need to import them from the third world. It's like, why don't we just train people in the country to do these jobs? They're like, no, we can't do that. We can't train Canadians to fill holes in the Canadian labor market. What are you guys talking about? You can't train Americans to be engineers. You can't train Canadians. You can't train Germans. You can't train Italians. The only way you can do it is to bring in engineers from India. Because India can train engineers for some reason, but America can't. America is not able to train engineers. India is, so we need to import them from there to here. Now, some people might ask that. Okay, let's see here. Can's in here. They're shipping in Hondurans to work in dairies because nobody local will work for the advertised rate of $7.25 an hour. So the government pays the company $22 an hour to provide guest workers. So yeah, that is true. That is how it works in a lot of cases. It's not even if you accept the retarded premise, it's not in practice how it actually works out. Okay, so there's that aspect of it. So, and I find this, and people in the chat can once again disagree with me if they're wrong. I find overwhelmingly, especially in Canada, there is an overwhelming opposition to restructuring Canadian education in a way to meet deficiencies in the economy. So they won't like subsidize or encourage or like try to get more people to go into engineering or whatever. Like I just don't get it. I kind of feel like if you just incentivize these things that you could get more people to do them. Like I find it hard to believe that there's literally no one in Canada or the US who would consider being an engineer even if you subsidize their education or provided other benefits. That like that's what we're supposed to believe. And then Elon will go, or whoever will go, well, Canadians and Americans aren't smart enough to do these jobs. Only people from India are smart enough to do these jobs. And you gotta kind of wonder, so if we're talking about the like distribution of IQ in society, so is there just a larger high distribution of IQ in the, like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why is Indian society in these people's view so completely different than our country? Also, why doesn't Japan have these problems? Why doesn't Japan have an economy that can't function um due to an due to a lack of engineers or a lack of scientists? How is somehow how has somehow like Japan remained a functional country? Like the Japanese education system seems to just be able to train people to do stuff. Same thing with South Korea. Same thing with Germany. How are these countries able to do these things, but America and Canada aren't? So that's kind of the second thing. And in my experience, and people once again let me know in the chat what yours is. I find most people who supposedly have a master's degree or a doctorate or a high skill set are not really educated. They just have learned a technical skill by rote. They will just have memorized how to do a specific technical skill, and anything outside of the instructions that they've memorized, they're incapable of doing. Um, so I'd like people to know, just because I know like the Indians I meet who are like programmers or whatever, they know how to code more than I do because I don't really know how to do it at all. But if I try to ask them to think outside of like what they've memorized or what they were taught at their diploma mill, they just can't do it. Like very basic concepts just don't like occur to them. Like they'll just stand there and like stare blankly at me if I ask like very basic questions that are not something that they memorized. And this is just kind of an issue I find in general. Now, this is not the case as much when dealing with East Asians, but with Indians, I do find that. Um, I do find that that's very much the case. So, yeah, so people chat, let me know if that's your situation, just because I feel like if there's a certain piece of technology or programming or something science related or even medicine, they're able to through their like universities memorize things, but if there's any kind of like um need to change things or make things more efficient or problem solve or think on the fly, I just find that they're largely incapable of doing that. Like I know whenever I'm doing work, I'm always trying to think, okay, well, how can we reorganize this? How can I make this more accurate? How can I clean this up? How can I avoid doing other stuff? And I just feel when you're dealing with a lot of these people, they just don't think that way. Like, so we're making these dashboards at work. Um, we're making these dashboards to show off information, and the Indian solution to it was to go through the entire dashboard and check every number in the dashboard against another data set that we had before the project started. So basically just to compare the output to the input or some, it's hard to even I have to be careful just because I don't want to give away too many specific details. But basically, we're trying to take data from a report and put it into a dashboard. So they're reasoning to try to figure out if the data that was being presented was accurate was to take the dashboards, print out the initial report, and manually compare every number. So what I said is, well, why don't you just look at the table? Like the dashboard has to be based on something, right? And they're like, what do you mean by that? And I'm just like, well, I mean, the dashboard's pulling for something. Like that graph, like there's a table that this is displaying the information from. So why don't we just look at the table and we can compare the table in Excel to the original report, which is also in Excel, and we can do this in like under an hour. And they're just like, no, well, we don't know what that is. And I'm just like, well, how can you not know what it is? Um, uh, and I'm like, okay, then how did you build this? And they go, oh, well, we just kind of. I think they like because they didn't actually. Apparently, they. I didn't even understand what they were saying, but to build it, they didn't follow any kind of logical thought process. They just basically put filters and labels and stuff and subdivided files until they got the right answer. But there isn't actually like a functional structure. They're like, there's so many tables that are linked together and so many filters we can't actually look at what's underneath it. And I was just like, what? Like, it's. And like I couldn't explain it to them. And I'm just gonna do a couple more rants just because I've got partially reassigned, so I spend a couple days now doing data work. Um, in addition to my normal job, um, like and so talking to one of the senior data scientists, who's although they're Nigerian, they're not from India, but I was trying to explain to them a difference between a nominal and a numeric variable. And I honestly could not explain it to them. Like, I was trying to explain that in their date column, like for the stuff we were collecting, you couldn't have like a whole bunch of different date formats. Like, you couldn't have somebody wrote out like December 22nd, 2025, or like 01-12-1990 and stuff like that. And I just like it doesn't the computer can't read it that way. um Also, just there was like a numeric value like for number of days, and some people had written in like 1 day or half a day like in text. um Along with some people who put in numbers and just like, look, we can't use this, the computer can't read that. Like, it's you're using two completely different types of variables. um you can't do crosstabs, you can't and like they just looked at me like I was retarded, like I was an alien and they had never heard of a nominal variable before, and they're like, whoa, you must be a statistician, you must be a genius. And like, no, I just I just know very basics of like how these things work. And there's just a whole bunch of, it's just like a whole bunch of just really basic things. Like, it's very clear whenever they would send us like whenever this person or some other people in the team would send us a product, they hadn't proofread it. Like, there was all kinds of errors, like all the capitalization and fonts were inconsistent. um their graphs didn't make any sense. Like, so we were comparing different locations. So some locations got um like 100,000, or I'm trying to think of an example. The amount of money that people spent um at a specific location. So, okay, basically, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of an equivalent that doesn't dox me. Basically, you had some locations that had a very high number of people and a very high number of the thing we were tracking, and some locations that had a very low number of people and very low number of the thing we're tracking. So some locations would have like uh 10,000 people and 6,000 of the thing we're tracking, and some places would have 100 people and 10 of the thing that we're tracking. So how they decided to present this was just to do a bar chart. So the bar chart just looked like shit because it's just like you can't compare. Like in this case, you're looking at per capita. You're like, well, if a place, if 90 people in a particular area are one thing, 90 out of 100 people in one area are one thing, and 1,000 out of 10,000 other group area people are another thing, then like proportionately, um, the previous area is more significant. It's overrepresented relative to the population. But I couldn't explain to them. I'm sorry if I'm not. I'm just trying to come up with ways to avoid certain information, but they just couldn't understand that. They couldn't understand per capita. They couldn't understand relative amounts. They couldn't understand proportionality or any of that stuff. It was just basically, we're just going to take what's in the data set we got and just throw it into like a dashboard or PowerPoint or something. And that's just going to be it. And if anyone calls us on it, they're racist. And I know that was my experience when I was in university. I got put on a team with an exchange with a foreign student who didn't speak any English, and that person just didn't participate even in the uh, in the group. Like they didn't show up for meetings. When we asked them to do something, they just said, "I can't speak English, um, so I can't work on this project." So when we like complained about it, they're like, "Well, that's racist. You have to find a way to make it work. In your jobs, you're not going to be able to pick who you work with. So so what you need to do is just." So anyways, we wound up just doing the entire project, and the guy shared our mark because there was no way of doing it without having like a Punjabi to English translation software or something to try to kind of do that. And that was kind of the experience. But my point is that a lot of these people who um there we go. A lot of the people who are supposedly like skilled immigrants actually really aren't. And once again, I don't get why you can't train the native population to do these things. And it's just like, what is the end result of this? Like, is bringing in 30 million Indians gonna somehow get America to Mars? Is like, I don't know. I just feel like basically what they're doing is, rather than solving any of the structural problems or trying to come up with solutions, they're just saying we're going to import 1 billion people from the third world to be our slaves, and they'll just do it. And that's kind of just the way of getting around it. So I don't know. I'm sorry if this was just a lot of rambling and maybe I didn't make a ton of sense. I just was looking at this shit, and I it irritated me, and I wanted to kind of to talk about it a bit. Let's see here. And so Elon has started to say like, well, we have to purge everybody from the movement who doesn't want unlimited immigration from India. These people are evil. They're bad actors. The only way America can survive is if they bring these people in, and stuff like that. Um, and that's kind of what we wind up getting. So I don't know if Elon's going to have to backtrack on this one, or if he's just going to double down and triple down on it, what Trump's going to do. As I said when Trump said this back during the campaign, Trump talks a lot of shit. And I will be the first to admit, Trump says a lot of bullshit. He doesn't deliver on a lot of the stuff he says. A lot of the time, that's a bad thing, but almost as often, it's a good thing because he said he was going to do something that sucked and he wound up not doing it. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. But we'll see what actually winds up happening because, once again, legal immigration did dramatically decrease under Trump in his first administration, and we had similar rhetoric about it back then. So I think we're just going to honestly have to go to and see what winds up happening, because this is just kind of the way Trump is. Um, he just throws a bunch of shit out there, and what he actually will do is kind of a open question, um, at the end of the day. Now, while we're talking about Trump, what is the deal with this like bizarre annexing Canada, annexing Greenland, annexing the Panama Canal stuff? Like, is it a meme? Is it a troll? Is it like a joke? Is Trump trying to distract people? Like, I don't really get exactly what the ultimate point of it is. Um, maybe I don't know. People in chat, maybe let me know what is Trump doing? Like, what is with all this like bizarre shit that he's posting? Let's go and take a look at some of this. Like, because I honestly don't get it. Um, I just I don't. Okay. Let's see here. Uh, Governor Justin Trudeau, she will not be missed. Like, we got this massive like post from him on Truth Social. Like, Merry Christmas to all, including the wonderful soldiers of China who are lovingly but illegally operating the Panama Canal. Is that actually happening? I don't know. Also, to Governor Justin Trudeau of Canada, whose citizen taxes are far too high. If Canada was to become our 51st state, their taxes would be cut by more than 60%. I don't know if that's real. Their businesses would immediately double in size, and they will be militarily protected like no other country anywhere else in the world. Likewise, the people of Greenland, which is needed by the United States for national security purposes, and who want the U.S. to be there, and we will. Okay, and then that cuts off. Um, so I don't know. I don't really get like what the whole point of this thing is. Um, like, is this a troll? Is this a joke? Is this to? And this is kind of my issue with Trump, and this is why. Okay, so there's different reasons people dislike Trump. The people who disliked him because they said he was a far right fascist were retarded. The people who disliked him because they said he was like bad optics, unserious, that he just pulled like stunts like this, and it was beneath the office of the president. And I get that that's kind of a meme at this point in time, but it kind of like, should the president of the United States really be doing this? Is this what he should be doing? Is schizo posting on Twitter or Truth Social or whatever the fuck his account is? Like, I don't think it's professional. I don't think it's presidential. I just think it makes you look like a crazy person, to be honest. And once again, like, I maybe I'm being a pussy here. Maybe I'm being like unfair, or I don't know. I just think it's retarded. And it was kind of funny the first time that he said it and he called Justo governor. Like that was funny, but it's just weird. And once again, I might just be stupid, but like I I get it, it's a joke. Maybe? I don't know. I don't know. He's just being crazy. Okay, so I'm not missing something. I'm not retarded. It's just schizo posting. And I just to me like, look, dude, you won the election. You're going to take office in a month or so. There's so many issues America has to deal with. We have Syria, we have Ukraine, we have the border, we have crime out of control, we have racial tensions, we have possible World War III in Ukraine, we have the future. There's so many things. And we're getting this bullshit about America invading Canada and buying Greenland and stuff, and that's the focus. So like maybe this is some 4D chess plan to distract or something. I don't get it. I don't get it. It's just bizarre. Also, I don't get why Americans would want to annex Canada anyways. Um because if they annex Canada, it would just create 10 blue states. So I don't really get like if they want to make Canada a territory, that might make sense, but it would basically just mean the Democrats would permanently control the Senate. Um that the Democrats would win pretty much every presidential election. Um like a cross-border election, um, and stuff like that. Trump said Canada would be one state, not 10. Okay, I'm sure that would make sense. I'm sure that would work somehow. So it's just once again, I don't get. It would create a lot. Okay, well, it would create. I'm trying to think what states have 30 million. Sorry, 40 million people. How many people does California have? Has 40. Okay, so California is roughly the same size as America, as Canada. So, how many electoral votes does Canada have? Um, okay, California. Okay, so this would be giving California another. This would be giving the Democrats another 54 100% guaranteed electoral votes. And that I feel like that's not a good idea. Let me see. How many congressmen come from, how many House of Representatives come from California? It is. Let's see. I'm just trying to see how many House seats there are in California. Okay, 52. So that would also give the Democrats another like. I'm going to be very generous. 42 guaranteed 100% blue seats. There might be like, if I'm being extremely generous, 10 seats that would go red in Canada. Maybe a couple in Alberta and a couple in Saskatchewan. In terms of like presidential elections, if you were to look at the states individually, Saskatchewan and Alberta would probably be lean or likely blue. Everything else would be safe blue. Like it's just I don't. If Canada's going to be a territory, I guess that makes sense. Um, I just like it would make more sense if you were someone on the left who wanted to annex Canada. I just unless Canada is just not you're not going to let Canadians vote and convert it into a territory and stuff like that. Um, yeah, I don't think they'd be allow them to vote. As I've said though, if Trump wants to invade Canada, I'm happy to be a collaborator, so long as I get a position in the new regime. Um, so Canadians have proven they don't deserve to. Well, I don't disagree. So interestingly, if we talk about the whole, what I've heard from people in the past, it's kind of funny because my grandfather was extremely pro-American. He was like a conservative. He said he was against union with America because he didn't want America's healthcare system. He said honestly, everything else would be better, but I don't want to have to deal with their healthcare system. And frankly, I do kind of agree with that. As bad as the Canadian system is, at least I know that I'm not gonna become a debt slave if I get sick. So that's kind of the issue. The issue is either you become a debt slave or you don't get treatment in time and you take your chances. Because things are covered in Canada, you just have really long waiting lists and you often die while you're waiting for treatment. Whereas in the US, you can get treatment, but it's expensive and yeah. So people just don't want to, I don't know, I just don't think people want to live under that system. You'll be a collaborator so long as you get alcohol and bitches. Um okay. Well, I don't really drink very much. Um as far as bitches go, I don't know. If I get some, I don't know. It depends. But let's see here. Has nothing to sell. Just have good insurance, bro. But that is the single biggest reason why people would not want to become part of the US is the healthcare system, also just the national debt and the possibility of getting drafted to serve in a stupid war against Russia or whoever. And those are really the only problems with it. So let's see here. But I don't know. If they wanted some sort of like union with Canada, it just I don't think you can really have it because Canada's just the size is just too the difference is just too big. So I don't know. I don't know. I maybe he's trying to piss off of China, maybe like okay, so my most charitable explanation is this is all to destabilize the Justo regime and he's trying to get rid of Justo and it's actually worked because his tariff policy and Justo's retarded response to it led to his deputy prime minister and financial minister of finance resigned because Justo like had no way of dealing with the whole tariff issue. So yeah. Um. Anyways, I think that covers that. As far as what's going on in Ukraine, if people just want a brief update on what else is going on in the world, there's not really enough to do an episode of the UCU on. Stuff is still just kind of progressing as is. Russia's making steady progress. The Ukrainians are taking heavy casualties. The situation is just getting worse and worse by the day. So my prediction is I'm trying to think of how to describe my prediction because I kind of keep saying I don't want to do predictions because this whole thing is so crazy. It's hard to, it doesn't really follow a logical timescale. I would be shocked at this point if the Ukrainian army made it to the summer. I would be utterly shocked if that wound up happening. I think some sort of military collapse. It's probably about an 80. Once again, I'm probably going to look retarded. An 80% chance it collapses by the summer, like July, August. I think it's like 30% or 40% that there's some sort of major collapse or crisis by March, April. I think it could really come at any day now. I think the longer time goes on, another way is maybe it's like starts at 10% or something and then goes up. The likelihood goes up by 10% a month. But I just I think there's like a 99% chance that it's going to collapse by the end of next year. I don't think anyone seriously thinks the Ukrainian army is going to make it through all of 2025. The question is more whether they're going to make it through the spring and if they're going to make it to the summer. So I don't really know. That's kind of where I am at the moment in terms of my thinking. As to the whole Trump Putin thing, I don't know if Trump really has any idea of what he's going to do. So from what I've seen, what Trump thinks he's going to be able to do, and this is just kind of speculation at my point, is what he thinks is he's going to talk to Putin, and the deal is he's going to offer him is a freeze and no NATO membership for Ukraine for 20 years. I think is what the offer is that he's going to give them. There's going to be no recognition of Crimea or the four regions as part of Russia. They aren't going to have to give over the rest of the regions that are still under Ukrainian control. There's not going to be a guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO. It is just going to be a conflict freeze and delay on NATO membership. That is what I think Trump thinks he's going to offer Putin. Um, as I've said, though, Putin is not going to accept that. Putin has made his terms very clear. The terms, and I'll repeat them again, are as follows. Recognition, de facto and de jure transfer of the four regions plus Crimea to the Russian Federation. A pledge from Ukraine that it will never join NATO, and this included in its constitution. Limitation on the size of Ukraine's army. A re-legalizing of the Russian Orthodox or the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Protections for Russian speakers and Russian culture in Ukraine, and a demilitarization of the various armed nationalist groups. I think is what the terms are that Russia has put forward. And those are their minimum terms, and the longer this thing goes on, the worse that the more severe they're going to get. I think there's a strong possibility that Putin has just kind of come to the determination that these guys are clowns, and he's just going to try to win a total military victory and just dictate terms to Kiev and not even try to come to some sort of negotiated settlement. I think it doesn't cost him anything to keep saying. So a lot of this is also just having to give cover to China and his other friends. So long as Russia keeps saying, we're willing to talk, we're ready to talk, we're ready to come to a negotiated settlement, that does not cost them anything. It makes them look good to the third world. It makes them look good to the BRICS. It makes them look good to any country that's not in Western Europe or North America. Putin really loses nothing by saying that. And every time the U.S. and Ukraine say we aren't going to negotiate, they look bad, and that hurts their standing with the previously mentioned groups. So if Trump comes forward and starts negotiating, um, that might actually make the situation worse because then they're gonna have to seriously like start to think about it. Um, if I was Putin and it looks like it's happening, this might be a good time to push. To start doing some bigger offensives and try to get the Ukrainian army to collapse. Because I feel like it's going to be harder once Trump starts actually negotiating. Something Putin has said though is there's not going to be um, a, a, a ceasefire under any conditions because the ceasefire would only help Ukraine at this point in time. Um, it wouldn't really help Russia. I mean, Russia could maybe rotate some troops out. They could maybe bring some more stuff up to the front, but it would 90% help Ukraine rather than Russia at this point in time. So they're not going to agree to that. So I think what Putin's decided is he's just going to continue the special military operation. They're going to keep just the general staff is just going to do what they want to do on their own schedule, and to listen to what Trump has to say. But the um the operation itself is just going to continue without any political pressure. Once again, I do find it very interesting how this conflict has been fought. Because on one hand, we have a side in which the military has no say and politicians control all of the decisions. And on the other, we have a side in which politicians really don't interfere with the military running the war. And so we get two very, very weird contrasts. Like stuff like the whole Kursk operation, um, because Russians' war strategy is largely being decided by the general staff, they will allow stuff like that to happen as part of grand strategy rather than view it as like a major political failure. And just a lot of things like not taking things by certain dates or like schedules or stuff like that. They just don't think that way. And so the pace that they're moving at and the decisions they make are kind of weird to us because we're used to looking at things in a very political PR perspective. So there's that. What's going on in Syria? I'm not really sure. Um, HTS looks like it's invading the Kurdish areas. I don't know much beyond that though. Israel has been on the move. They're taking more territory. Aside from that, I don't really know what else is going on in the world. Like I said, things are just kind of moving along the way that they were moving along. So that's all I really had to talk about. I haven't, um, I haven't like read anything about the whole Luigi thing. I don't even really know what happened. I know it's a big story. I just didn't look into it really. Maybe I'll look into it at some point. I just didn't look that like interesting to me. I'm not. I'm very seldom that interested in like a lot of these just random shootings that happen. Maybe this is the biggest one, but I have not looked into it, so that's the reason I haven't talked about it at all. So, anyways, guys, have a good night. God bless.